I'm Deborah Lockwood, Chair of the Washington County Planning Commission. Today is February 15th, 2023, and this evening's meeting of the Planning Commission is called to order. I'd like to ask the Clerk Aguilar, to give us a roll call, please.
Sure. Commissioner Fry.
Hello, present.
Thank you. Commissioner Hapner.
Present.
Commissioner Kaiser. Oh, I think you're muted. Commissioner Kaiser or Kaiser. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
It seems he's not hearing us.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Commissioner Kaiser, do you have your microphone muted or is it unmuted now? Might not be able to hear us.
I'll check in with that.
Okay. Commissioner Milliman.
Present.
Commissioner Maury Bidu.
Present.
And Commissioner Podar said that she would be absent. Commissioner Will. He did say that he was going to attend, but looks like he's not present at the moment. And Vice Chair Dye said that he was going to be absent today. Chair Lockwood.
Present.
Thank you. Looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in attendance. We do have a quorum.
Thank you. I'm wondering if we can take a moment to check in. Are we getting Commissioner Kaiser participating?
I just and
I can't understand you, Mr. Borkowitz. Your audio is cloudy.
Here now, sorry about that.
Okay. So
it looks like we have 8 as a quorum now.
Great.
Excuse me, 1, 2, 3, 4, yes, or 7, 8, 9, because 2 are absent.
And we have 7 participating.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Before we head into our agenda, I wanted to welcome our new members, Commissioner Fry and Commissioner Kaiser. And I wonder if each of you would say a few words just introducing yourself to us, and then maybe we'll each say a few words introducing ourselves to you.
Do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, I'm Mike Fry. Let's see, I've been in Washington County, living in the area for almost 18 years, 17 years, 18 years between here and kind of the Vancouver area, I guess. And I work for Noise Development, local builder developer. So I kind of bring that background and view and history on things. And I don't know, let's see, I've got a wife and 2 kids, and I'm excited to be part of this and kind of help keep Washington County moving forward.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm Joe Kaiser. I'm the owner of Rolling Rock Community Management. We manage HOAs from Kelso to clear down to, well, now Medford, unfortunately. So at any rate, that's what I do. I've been doing that for the last 20 years. Before that, I was a Hillsborough City Councilor for 7 years and grew up in Aloha. Both my wife and I went to Aloha High School, and we have one son who's at University of Oregon. And yeah, I'm here because I don't know, I guess just because I had nothing better to do. It seemed like a good idea. Actually, I'm here because I've always been involved in the industry. I work with a lot of builders and I work in housing a lot, and I really enjoy the process. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you and welcome. Any other commissioner want to introduce yourselves to our new commissioners?
Hi, I'm
Mike,
Mark Havener. I live out in the Shoals area now. I retired from Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue as an assistant chief and was responsible for a lot of the capital projects that Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue undertook. It's a pleasure being on the Planning Commission and help guide our future.
Thank you. I can go next. I'm Deborah Lockwood. I'm midway through my second term on the Planning Commission. In my working life, I was a college teacher. I represent District 2, Commissioner Treese's district. I live north of Hillsborough. I've lived here almost 30 years, about 1 mile north of the urban growth boundary. So I bring some perspective on rural issues and also on perspective on balancing rural interests and urban interests.
I'm
Nick.
Commissioner Rachel Maury Bidu. I represent District 1, which is Beaverton. I live in Central Beaverton, and I work for Network for Oregon Affordable Housing. So we're a not-for-profit affordable housing lender. And so I have been connected with the housing industry, specifically affordable, for about 14 years now. I have lived in Washington County off and on since 2007. And yeah, I've been on the Planning Commission for about 1.5 years now.
Thank you. Commissioner Milliman.
I'm Stacy Milliman. I've been on the commission since 2021. I live southwest Murray Shoals, kind of near Raggart, and I work for a local utility and like what Washington County does.
All right. Thank you all. I don't think I've missed anyone. Again, welcome. I look forward to working with you all. Director's report, please.
Thank you. I am Erin Mordell, Planning and Development Services Manager for Washington County, and I have the director's report. So first of all, I want to echo the welcome for our 2 new planning commissioners. We're really happy to have you here this evening. We have updated the website with photos of almost all of our planning commissioners, and we have our new commissioners up there now. It looks really good, so we're happy to have people's participation in that. The Planning Commission meetings continue to be held virtually, as we are virtual right now, but our hybrid meeting last month was very successful. And so we'd like to have more conversations about what the Planning Commission would like to do going into the future, and if there is interest in having maybe a few hybrid meetings a year or some kind of a mix like that. So possibly a discussion at a future meeting could be held and give people a little bit of time to think about that and think about what would work for them. Of course, at the discretion of Chair Lockwood and when she'd like to have that conversation. I want to let you know about a couple of upcoming events, and we will follow up with email information about these. The Oregon chapter of the American Planning Association will be holding a virtual planning commissioner training on Wednesday, March 22nd. It is in the evening. It's 5:30 to 7:30. The county will pay for your registration fees if that's something you'd like to do, and I'd encourage you to do that if you're interested. So please reach out to Todd Borkowitz for more information about that. We also, as I said, can follow up with an email to everyone to remind you about this. We also will be having a countywide volunteer appreciation event on Thursday, April 13th from 5:30 to 7:30. It will be at the Wingspan Conference Center, which is at the Westside Commons, formerly known as the Fair Complex. And this will be a really fun event for those of you who have participated in the past. There's activities and food and just celebration of all the work that volunteers do for Washington County. So we'd really love it if you'd be able to attend that. A little bit of a procedural item next. we realized that while we do track planning commissioner attendance throughout the year, we need to be a little bit more specific in our reporting as to whether or not an absence was excused. So in the past, we haven't really tracked that. So if you are going to miss a planning commission meeting, please let us know in advance. As long as you let us know in advance, that counts as an excused absence. Essentially, what we're looking for is just doing a better job of documenting that we knew in advance a person wasn't going to be here. So in the future, if you're going to miss a meeting, please, again, reach out to Todd, who's our planning commission liaison, and just let him know you'll miss the meeting, and then you'll be marked as an excused absence for that evening. On a more fun note, at least for me, my former position, the principal transportation planner position, is posted right now. So if you know folks who are transportation planners or engineers and might be interested in that role, please pass it along. The recruitment will be open until Sunday, March 5th. We're really looking forward to people spreading the word about that. I then have a couple of updates for you from recent board meetings. The board held a hearing on January 24th on Ordinance 882, the Tile Flat Road extension. At that time, when we continued the ordinance to that date, we thought Metro would be done making their decision about the urban growth boundary land swap, but they weren't. And so the board decided to continue the hearing again. And so the board has now continued that hearing to March 21st. At the Metro meeting on February 3rd, the Metro Council did approve the land swap, which means that they approved bringing land adjacent to the city of Tigard into the urban growth boundary and removing some land in Clackamas County from the urban growth boundary. So it's pretty interesting. It's the first time that the Metro urban growth boundary has been adjusted through a land swap. It has been used elsewhere in the state of Oregon. So assuming that that will go forward, it is within the appeals period right now, but you will see some future ordinances relating to applying FD20 to that land and possibly some other associated changes to our planning documents. So look for that at some point in the future. It's an interesting process for us. And then on February 7th, the board adopted Ordinance 889, which was the minor amendments to the Community Development Code, and Ordinance 890, which was the middle housing land divisions. So we're happy to have those ordinances approved. Thanks for your work on them. So for your meeting today, you'll be hearing a work session on the climate-friendly and equitable communities implementation from the state. We will then have a hearing on a proposed quasi-judicial plan amendment, and we'll be electing a planning commission chair and vice chair. Upcoming meetings for your March 1st day meeting, we don't know of any items right now, so we're recommending canceling that meeting unless something has come up that we didn't know about previously. On March 15th, you'll have an evening meeting, and we're proposing a work session on our significant natural resource regulation update at that time, and then possibly other work session items as we might need to bring some other things forward or as you would like to request them. And then on April 5th for our day meeting, we, for the work session, may have the Fair Housing Council of Oregon training that we had discussed previously, and then we'll provide a summary of action on all recent ordinances. So pretty busy next couple of months. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Mordell? All right, I don't see any hands up. Thank you very much for that report. Next item on the agenda is public communication. So Clerk Aguilar, has anyone signed up to speak to us on matters not on our agenda tonight?
No, Chair Lockwood, no one has signed up to provide comments tonight. And I would also like to make a correction for the roll call that there is only 6 planning commissioner in attendance tonight.
Thank you. Yeah. Right. I did get kind of mixed up as to how the count there. Okay, thank you for the correction. Okay. Our next item then is our work session on climate-friendly and equitable communities. It's a, I guess it should be, yes, it's called a briefing. All right, Ms. Cherniak.
Yeah, so Steve Kelly will give that presentation.
Chuck, this is Todd. Will you please promote Steve Kelly? I don't have the ability to do so. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Steve, are you able to unmute yourself and start?
He's probably still in Zoom
Oh,
transition.
there he is. Okay.
Takes a little bit.
I thought I saw him there already. Sorry.
There we go. Sorry about that. Something happened while I was transitioning over. Can everybody hear me okay? I think I can
Yes.
white it out here with the lighting. I'll see if I can adjust the angle. Sorry about that. Well, I better just go ahead. Can we share the presentation? Ah, there we go. It's coming up. Well, thank you for having me here this evening. Again, my name's Steve Kelly. I'm a senior transportation planner with the department. I was also here in October to provide an overview of the new state requirements, and these requirements are called the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Requirements. And I may use their acronym in our conversation. If I do, the word I'm saying is CFEC. It's the acronym here is a CFEC. And these rules really do have broad implications for land use and transportation planning throughout urban unincorporated Washington County. Next slide, please. So as a brief overview, tonight I'll provide a background on the climate-friendly and equitable communities rules and where they came from and generally the topics they cover. Then I'll spend most of the time talking and discussing what they call parking reform or parking related changes for planning in metropolitan areas of Oregon. And then also talk about the other regulatory parking requirements and hopefully leave time for questions and discussion. Next slide, please. There we go. So these rules were instigated based on Governor Brown's executive order in 2020 for state agencies to exercise all authority and discretion to meet Oregon's climate goals. These rules were adopted by the Land Conservation and Development Commission, and they directed the Department of Land Conservation and Development to develop amendments to the transportation planning rule and the other rules related to greenhouse gas emissions. They did form an advisory committee with diverse membership from around the state. Next slide, please. And the updated rules affect land use, building, and transportation planning rules. These rules were adopted in July of 2022, so 6-8 months ago now. And they have considerable impact on land use and building. We're required to designate walkable and climate-friendly areas. The parking management requirements that I'll be discussing in a few minutes, as well as provide for pedestrian-friendly and connected communities. On the transportation side, these rules call for us to plan for high-quality pedestrian, bicycle, and transit infrastructure to prioritize climate and equity outcomes and reduce vehicle miles traveled per capita. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, there's two categories of these rules. There's the regional greenhouse gas reduction targets that are for the entire Portland region. And then each jurisdiction complies with the transportation planning rule, Division 12. So the land use and transportation rules are focused now on reducing greenhouse gases and promoting equity. Next slide, please. So Oregon has 8 metropolitan areas that these rules apply within, and Portland area has additional rules that are a little bit different than elsewhere in the state. Sort of recognize that Portland is a different sized metropolitan area. And I'd like to point out that Washington County has one of the higher thresholds for population under these rules, has the highest threshold. And we also have a rural area, and we're also in the Portland metropolitan area. So we get the most complete set of these rules for our communities here in unincorporated urban Washington County. Next slide, please. The new rules start with parking reform, and that's the first major change. But there's several other major changes that are forthcoming after this. The next one that will go into effect next year is the metro area will be reexamining the Metropolitan Urban Growth Management Plan, and that may result in new requirements for cities and counties in the metro area. And that has yet to be determined exactly what that'll be. And then the next one down, the transportation performance standards, there's a lot of words in there about performance standards. And we're still working with DLCD staff to really figure out what the implications of those rules are. And so I leave it on there. I'm not sure if it's going to be a huge issue, but it could be. And so as we learn more, that'll be more forthcoming, more information is forthcoming. And then the transportation system plan updates, there's extensive requirements for all cities and counties in metropolitan areas to update their transportation plans, their inventories, to demonstrate a reduction in vehicle miles traveled. And at the same time, there's some significant community development code requirements that will go into effect when we update our transportation plan. So next slide, please. There we go. So to start with parking reform goes into effect in 2 phases. There's phase A is actually already into effect, and that is the they called reduced parking mandates or reduced minimum parking requirements. And then the second phase goes into effect later this year, and they called that regulation improvements. So next slide, please, the first part of this state rule. So reduced mandates apply for development applications submitted starting this year, and they do not allow for jurisdictions, cities and counties to require more than 1 parking space per unit in residential developments with more than 1 unit. And our community development code is in compliance with that. So that's not an issue for us. And then cities and counties may not require parking for some limited types of developments here. Group housing, they're listed. Publicly supported housing, smaller units than 700 square feet. All of those 7 different categories of development. Next slide, please. So in addition to that, there's a section that requires that we no longer have minimum parking requirements near transit corridors. And by near, they mean 3/4 of a mile from Max and West stations, rail transit stations, and 1/2 mile from bus corridors with 4 or more buses per hour. So next slide, please. We'll share the map. And it's hard to see on this map. It's the blue area there represents the 3/4 mile, thank you, of the light rail and west stations. And the yellow or orange area is the half-mile buffer of parcels within a half-mile of frequent, how their definition of frequent transit corridors. And that affects the majority of the lands within unincorporated urban Washington County. There's certainly portions that are not affected by that map at this point. So next slide, please. And the next step is parking reform B. They called regulation improvement, and this next step also has two parts. And the first part requires unincorporated urban Washington County to remove minimum parking requirements throughout the urban unincorporated area, or there's alternative pathways that the county potentially could try to comply with. And then there's also a number of attributes related to parking areas. And so if a property owner does develop and wants to have a parking area, then there are regulations related to how and the circumstances around that parking area. So next slide, please. This slide tries to summarize a large portion of transportation planning rules in one slide. So I apologize for all the words here. I'll try to briefly walk through it. Pathway 1, I sort of already discussed. That is repeal all the required minimum parking in urban unincorporated Washington County, throughout the county, urban area. And then pathways 2 and 3 have several components that are similar or the same, and several that are different. That first box under pathways 2 and 3 tries to summarize multiple sections of code. It basically says that the new rules would require that we include unbundled parking in transit corridors and provide for other opportunities to reduce or limit the amount of minimum parking that could be required. And then the second box below that says adopt on-street parking pricing for 10% of all on-street parking spaces throughout urban unincorporated Washington County. That is going to be a large number of parking spaces. And then in addition to those combined sections, pathway 2 does more with parking pricing. It's called the fair parking approach, and includes a broader application of unbundled parking. If you have questions about what unbundled parking is, I can come back to it, but we can go forward now. Well, I'll just mention that unbundled parking means that the rent someone pays for, or the mortgage that someone purchases for a property, would have the parking space be a separate component of the charge of the lease. That's a quick summary. And then pathway 3 has parking regulations that would minimize the amount of parking required or provide for other opportunities to reduce the amount of parking required, and also would require a designation, a district where on-street parking is managed through timing, permits, or pricing. Next slide, please. That was a lot. Okay. The parking area regulations, there's a number of parking lot attributes we'll be needing to pay attention to for those areas that provide parking. Particularly, there is the lots that are greater than a quarter acre in size will be required to have tree canopies and street-like design along the driveways. And then there will be an option of solar panels, green energy, or enhanced tree canopy for those larger, well, quarter acre lot parking areas. And next slide, please. And in addition, there are new required parking maximums. The residential development maximums are not too dissimilar from what we would expect in our current maximums. The commercial and retail maximums are not too dissimilar from what we currently have for parking space maximums. There's a few categories that will need to be adjusted. And then the new one is that one at the top. Buildings more than 6,500 square feet floor area may not have more surface parking than the floor area of the building. That's a new one for us. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to be implemented. But that also, I want to point out, includes residential. There's no type of development that is excluded there. Next slide, please. We've been reviewing what other jurisdictions are doing and saying about these rules. Again, they're statewide. Corvallis and Tigard have already adopted amendments that remove minimum parking requirements. And conversations with staff elsewhere in the Portland metro area, everybody I've talked to has said their community is looking at remove minimum parking requirements. There are some clearly that are in the we don't know yet category and are exploring and keeping all options open at this time. We do know that we haven't heard anybody that's actually pursuing Pathway 2, and we've heard that Medford is looking at Pathway 3 or 1. That's the extent of variance we've seen across jurisdictions, other jurisdictions responding thus far. Next slide, please. We didn't know where to include this one in the presentation, but there also this spring goes into effect requirements for the building to provide enough electrical capacity and conduit to provide new buildings to serve 40% of parking spaces with charging levels. And these are not in our community development code at this point. We anticipate we will need to put them there, but going into effect with the building code at this time is the electric vehicle charging rules. And next slide, please. So our staff recommendation is to proceed with exploring Pathway 1, which would remove all minimum parking requirements countywide throughout the urban unincorporated area. And the rationale for that is that Pathways 2 and 3 require urban unincorporated Washington County to establish an on-street parking pricing program. We do not have a program or really a mechanism to develop or administer it at this time. We could reconsider that option at any time going forward if we did have such a program in place or had another form of parking benefit district in the future. And then there's some chance these rules, when we last talked last fall, were under appeal. And there are some chances that these rules will be amended over the next year or more as things proceed, especially through the judicial system. There's a lot to these rules. This is only the first section that goes into effect. And so there's opportunities here that things may change. And we're well aware of that, but we do need to continue to proceed with the rules that we've been given. So next slide, please. And finally, my last slide here. Although I said that we need to proceed with the rules we've been given, I think there's considerable opportunity for the board and planning commission to weigh in on how we go about doing so. And next steps, there was discussion just before my presentation here about the April 5th work session. So I'm hoping maybe we can find time for a continued discussion then, as well as perhaps one later this spring. And then as staff, we're expecting to have an ordinance for filed for deliberations by the Planning Commission and board over the summer. And so that's my last slide. I'll leave it open for questions or discussion. Thank you for your attention. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. Do commissioners have questions or comments? Commissioner Havner.
Yeah, Steve, can we back up to the slide about the parking area not exceeding the square footage of the building?
I think we can. Thank you. Yeah, that's
so,
up. One back, one forward. Yeah.
Whoa.
Well, go ahead with the question. I know what the slide says. Maybe.
So was it 6,500 or 65,000 square feet?
65,000. Did I say 6,500?
Yeah, but
Sorry if I did.
and is that only applicable then in the urban unincorporated area?
That's right.
Okay, so a car dealership probably is an inverse of that, or is that an exclusion?
Yeah, we're looking for slide 15, I think it is. A car dealership would definitely be applicable, but I think it would be the parking area, not the vehicle display area. Okay. So if they had a large field with vehicles displayed, I don't know if that, I'd have to confirm. I don't know if that would count.
So then my other concern is like with government fleet operations, as an example, TVF&R has a 5-acre parcel. It's in an incorporated area, but could have been an unincorporated, that has an acre under roof and 4 acres of fleet operations parking. Do they have to apply for an exemption if they were to go that route?
I don't know if there is an exemption process here. It's a state rule. I think there would have to be, but I don't know what that looks like at this time.
If I could weigh in a little bit on that, 2 points of clarification that I want to make. First of all, these rules do apply to the incorporated areas, but we don't have jurisdiction over the incorporated areas for land use rules. So we're only talking about the rules will apply in unincorporated. The city staff are all having this exact same conversation about how they'll implement the rules. What these rules are talking about is what we can require. A developer can choose to do other things. And so while we, for example, won't be able to require parking maximums in some circumstances, it's possible for private development or other government entities to still deliver areas for vehicular storage. But I think these are really great questions because there's a lot of technicalities in these rules that we haven't fully digested. And I think that this is something we need to think about a little bit more.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Kaiser.
Steve, quick question. I had 2 questions for you. The first one I have is, I think I saw in there 5 units or more has to have a 40%, has to provide 40%, the equivalency of 40% electrical hookups for electric cars. And that's on multifamily. So that's not just apartments, that's condominiums as well then, right? Because that's
right.
So just from my perspective, folks, I have several clients that build small projects that utilize the condominium regime rather than just single family that are basically townhomes. I have one in Sherwood right now that's 5 units, and that means they've got to install two. Well, it would sound like they need to install 2 electrical vehicle outlets there on site. That's a burden. That's pretty big for such a small community or for such a small development.
Yeah, it's these are impactful rules. I think it's not the actual charging station. I'm not a building permit expert, but I think it's just the electrical capacity.
So just the capacity built into the house or into the unit, possibly.
That's my limited understanding, and I'm not the expert on that at all.
That would make more sense, frankly. My second question was on the slides back to the uncoupling of parking spots from rentals.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? You said to ask you about that. Come back to it if possible.
Yeah, I can try. I tried a real brief summary. One of the concepts that's out there for parking, and we allow this now, is that the rent of a unit or the sale of a unit typically includes the lease, and the monthly payment includes the parking space, or maybe 2, depending upon what you're actually doing there. And then in the transit corridors and or throughout the urban area, the requirement would be that the lease and the parking space be separate charges.
What is their hope there? That I'm not totally understanding. I mean, obviously it would be, so just as an example, I'll just use an example. Let's say I owned an apartment complex and I've got a renter who's going to come rent, and now his unit is $1,000 and I've got a parking spot that I have to lease him as well. Is there hope that people will have less cars if they have to pay rent for them?
I think it's twofold. What you stated, that people might choose to not have as many automobiles if they had to also pay a charge each month for the storage of that vehicle. And then the land use side of not providing excess parking that people aren't utilizing. I think those are the goals. I think unbundling parking would be a difficult enforcement issue for unincorporated Washington County or any community.
Last question I had real quick. Just from your perspective, when we talk about essentially having to repeal the parking parking restrictions that are placed on development, help me explain why they wanted to go there. Is the idea to I think what I understand is they're wanting to shrink the size of parking overall, and is the thought that that's going to change behavior? I mean, obviously I understand good for climate control, but also it's a behavioral issue, right?
I think that's part of the thought process behind the rules. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
It's a little interesting that it's also climate and equity, but that apartment parking topic in particular feels like it's contrary to equity, and like it's going to essentially be a burden on a lot of people who might have a lower income, be living in an apartment, and now they're going to add another cost to, it's almost just an opportunity for increased rent costs for people who own apartments and whatnot, and just another burden on people who might be struggling to make it by right now.
I have a question. All of these provisions apply to existing and new development. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, typically, the new development is coming in for a development approval. So that's where the community development code and those parking requirements and other changes
Right.
would apply.
Okay, so the upheaval is less than it might have been since it's not applying to existing. Yeah.
Well, there is a path forward for conversion of existing parking lots. That's a lot easier than it was in the past. And so that's a part of the rules that we'll need to implement as well. So while yes, the new standards apply to new development, it could result in additional parking lot conversions coming forward in the future. So no, we're not going to go around and revisit every land use approval and say, by the way, you didn't need to provide any of that parking. That's not exactly how it works, but people could come in and say, I was required to provide 40 parking spaces and now I would like to build another building or something else there. So we don't know yet what the effects will be of these rules, but we'll experience that over the next few years.
Thank you. Commissioner Bidu.
Yeah, thank you. Along with this parking conversation, is there a conversation about increase in public transportation access and supporting additional means for cycling? I see a disconnect here between encouraging people to change behaviors without offering solutions for doing that.
Yes.
Yeah. I would say staff also see that, and we share your concern.
Yeah.
More diesel buses.
Mr. Bovet.
And if I could just add, and this is normally not what I would comment on as your county council, but I actually attended a luncheon among a whole litany of land use lawyers. We meet about once a month. And this was a topic of conversation, and the exact point made by Commissioner Bidu was made there. And I think everybody's struggling with that issue, particularly in Metro, because TriMet doesn't seem to be wanting to, well, they don't have it, spend billions of dollars expanding transit everywhere. But the point that I guess my point is the point that Commissioner Bidu has made is being made all over the state of Oregon right now.
And so there is a legal challenge to these rules. Rob or Steve may be able to remind me how many jurisdictions are in that lawsuit. Is it 9 or 10?
I think it's 16 actually.
16 now, so the number's quite a bit bigger than it was. So they had attempted to stop the rules from being implemented, but that didn't happen. And so some of them did already take effect, but I believe there's still some legal challenge going forward. And then there's some legislation that's been introduced that would also put a pause on the implementation, but we don't know the outcomes of that. So this is a state mandate. We have to proceed as though these are the rules and we must implement them.
And you have a deadline or goal of June to have an ordinance, is that right?
Well, the way the rules are written, we need to have them implemented. Actually, we needed to have some of them implemented by December 31st of 22. We, along with most jurisdictions, were not able to file an ordinance and have it adopted in that amount of time. Only 2 jurisdictions in the state of Oregon were able to get their parking minimum ordinance done that quickly. That was Tigard and Corvallis, as shown on Steve's slide. Most jurisdictions are really struggling right now with staff capacity and the ability to respond to this and other state mandates. So while some of the rules will take effect at the end of June, we'll have a development code that's somewhat not in compliance with those. So our goal is to file the ordinance as close as possible to June so that we can show we're making forward progress. We're trying to implement these rules. But what we've done internally already is given staff guidance that they can't enforce the minimum parking standard in our development code in the transit corridors or for those development types, even though our development code still calls for them. And we will do a similar staff guidance for starting July 1st with the additional rules that have come into play while our development code is not yet updated. So it'll be somewhat of a long process. So that was a long answer to your question. We do intend to file the ordinance as close to June as possible, but it will take a while to work through our processes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments on this? All right, I'm not seeing any. Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly.
Sorry, can I ask one more question, clarifying question?
Sure, go ahead, Commissioner Fry.
So on some of those parking requirements, am I understanding right that we would essentially have kind of residential areas, just kind of a older, lower density neighborhood, or a newer, lower density neighborhood that could be being developed, I suppose. Are we going to start to have the potential to see metered parking just kind of throughout all kinds of areas? I know there was a concern that Washington County wouldn't be able to support that, but is that kind of the goal?
I think that's unlikely. The more likely scenario would be that a new development would come in and provide less new parking than would otherwise be required by our code now. So the amount of parking that would be in that new development would be up to the developer. And, you know, it may be an existing neighborhood with existing patterns and a community that this goes, you know, something goes in adjacent to or near, and, you know, would have less parking than we would have previously been able to require. The metered parking, I don't think we have that as a way to proceed in the unincorporated area. And there's some chance that the direction from the commission will be to make adjustments such that that wouldn't apply in unincorporated parts of the metro area. I don't know that that would occur or not. Right now, what it says is it does. And so we've been in discussions, well, was that intended? What was, you know, how does this work for us? How can we do this? But that said, it also seems that the direction many of the cities in the county are proceeding is with the no requirement for parking, minimum parking. Did I get to an answer to the question?
Yeah, I think I might not. I think I need to do more reading on this, but it sounded to me like there are going to be, you know, stages of this, and the first easy low-hanging fruit is no requirements, but then at some point it's going to get where we have to implement more and more pieces of it, and that's where I think it gets a little bit more complicated to me.
It's two different pieces, right? So if we wanted to keep our minimum parking requirements, we would have to start parking pricing. And since we don't think that we can price parking because we don't have a program and a mechanism already set up to do that, we're recommending just removing minimum parking. So to our knowledge, most jurisdictions in the state are pursuing that path. But that's not to say that this is the end of these rules and that future requirements won't come down requiring some kind of pricing programs. If it did happen, though, you were asking about residential areas or lower density areas, I would expect parking pricing to occur more in commercial and town center type areas, generally because that's typically where we see it. But I don't know that for sure. So as far as these rules are written, we would probably be most likely just to remove the minimum parking and not do a pricing program.
Okay, thank you.
Any more for Mr. Kelly? All right.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time this evening.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are at almost 7:30. Normally we take a break at about 90 minutes. And so I'm wondering if we should have a little break now and then plan to go without interruption for the public hearing. Do you have a thought about that, Mr. Bovet?
Really your discretion, Madam Chair, in terms of how you want to proceed. Up to you.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm thinking we'll go ahead and take a break later if it seems we need one, but do any commissioners have any preference on that? All right, then let's go ahead.
So the next item is a plan amendment, and Brian Robb will give the presentation. Go ahead, Brian.
I'm not seeing the presentation brought up yet. There we go.
Now, I don't mean to interrupt, but would you like me to start this off, or is there going to be a slide in here that cues me?
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Yeah, I thought we were going to start with county council, but is that correct?
Indeed, yes, yes.
So if we could actually turn that screen off, thanks. As we all talked last time, and I think our two brand new commissioners were actually in the audience at the time, this is a quasi-judicial hearing, and it's not all that common for quasi-judicial hearings to come before the Planning Commission, but I'm more than happy to take questions during this process. As I mentioned to the Planning Commission last month, think of yourselves more as a jury hearing a case in this type of matter, rather than as legislators enacting an ordinance. And if you think about that, all of this will kind of make sense. But I'm going to start out because there are different processes required for quasi-judicial hearings. There are more due process protections in summary. And so I'm going to begin with a script that will describe the quasi-judicial process required under our Planning Commission rules, and then we'll go from there. So a lot of this is going to seem canned, and it kind of is. It's right out of our rules, but I'm going to go ahead and do the introduction before we get to Brian's staff report. Tonight's hearing before the Planning Commission is for a plan amendment to change the land use designation of a 0.97 acre lot that contains an existing home from Neighborhood Commercial District, also known as NC, to residential 9 units per acre district, commonly known as R9, consistent with the designation of bordering lands to the south and east. The hearing will be conducted in the following manner. First, staff will present a summary of the applicable criteria and the staff report, including a recommendation. The Planning Commission can ask any clarifying questions it wishes. The chair will then open the public hearing. Second, the applicant may provide information by way of testimony, a presentation, or both. There is a 10-minute limit on that part of the hearing. Next, testimony will be taken from persons in favor of the proposal. There is a 5-minute time limit per person, 10 minutes for a CPO. Next, testimony will be taken from persons in opposition to the proposal. There's a 5-minute limit per person, 10 minutes per CPO. If there are any persons that wish to testify and who are neutral on the proposal, that testimony will be taken next with the same time limits. Finally, the applicant will have an opportunity to offer rebuttal information or testimony if the applicant so desires. There is a 5-minute time limit on this final part of the hearing. Anyone who wishes to testify on this plan amendment and has not notified staff in advance will need to raise their virtual hand when staff asks who will testify in favor, who will testify in opposition, and who will testify as neutral. So just make sure you raise your hand at the appropriate time so you can get called on. Once each person is given their opportunity to speak, they should state their name and address, after which I will ask them to take an oath or affirmation as to the truthfulness of their testimony. Afterwards, the person can begin their testimony. Persons may also submit written testimony to the clerk for the Planning Commission. It can be emailed to lutplanningcommission@washingtoncounty.or.gov. The deadline to submit written testimony on this plan amendment is the close of the public hearing, unless the Planning Commission agrees to establish a later deadline. Prior to the end of the public hearing tonight, a participant in this hearing may request a continuance to submit additional testimony, evidence, or argument, and request that the record remain open for at least 7 days. Prior to the close of this hearing, Chair Lockwood will ask Clerk Aguilar if any additional written testimony has been received. After the close of the public hearing, the Planning Commission may deliberate and vote on this plan amendment request. No additional testimony will be received after the public hearing is closed, except as I just described a few minutes ago. All testimony, arguments, and evidence should be directed toward the criteria described by staff during the opening report that you'll hear from Brian Robb here in a moment, or other criteria in the plan or land use regulations, which the person providing testimony believes to apply to the decision on this plan amendment. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the Planning Commission and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude the ability to make an appeal based on that issue. Further, failure of the applicant to raise any constitutional or other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow Washington County to respond to the issue may preclude their ability to file a lawsuit for any damages. At this time, each planning commissioner should disclose any ex parte contacts, bias, or conflicts of interest. Those are the 3 areas that are required to be disclosed for a quasi-judicial hearing that I mentioned last month. I'm more than happy to describe in detail what those amount to, but in short, an ex parte contact means you've heard from one of the parties outside of this hearing, and so you need to put it on the record to disclose that you've heard from one of the parties, because in the interest of fairness, everybody needs to know who's heard what. Bias means you actually know one of the parties, one of the particularly affected property owners, and you have some bias either in favor or against them. And conflicts of interest mean that you have some financial or pecuniary interest here that a decision in this matter might affect you or your family financially, either positively or avoidance of financial detriment. So those are my very brief summations of ex parte contacts, bias, and conflicts of interest. So I would at this time call on any planning commissioner present for this hearing to disclose any ex parte contacts, bias, or conflicts of interest that you might have. And I'm also happy to further describe those if you're not sure. Looks like we have Commissioner Fry.
Yeah, so I just want to disclose potential conflict. I don't have a direct conflict on this, but as a developer and as a resident of the area, I walked past this property and lived right around this property for many, many years. And as a developer, I have briefly evaluated this property in the past, and we've looked at it as the same thing that we're looking at right now is the possibility that this could be changed to an R9 zone. And we've stayed away from the neighborhood commercial as a company, and we don't have any current interest in it. I don't know the current applicant or any of those things, but there is some potential conflict. And then if the property did come for sale, my company could look at it again in the future. But there's no direct conflict or known conflict at this point. Just want to disclose that.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Fry. That was perfect. Actually, that's an example of a potential conflict of interest where there's no guarantee of any financial benefit or avoidance of financial detriment, but it's a possibility. The difference between an actual and a potential conflict of interest is a potential conflict of interest requires disclosure, just as Commissioner Fry did. An actual conflict of interest requires not only disclosure, but in most cases that you essentially remove yourself from the deliberation and decision-making process. So are there any other disclosures of ex parte contacts, bias, or conflicts of interest that any other commissioners would wish to disclose before we begin this hearing process? And I'm not seeing any others, Chair Lockwood, so I'll turn it back over to you. And I think we're now ready for Brian Robb's staff report.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bovet. May we have the staff report, please, Mr. Robb?
Thanks, Rob. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Well, good evening, Chair Lockwood and Commissioners. I'm Brian Robb, Associate Planner in the Community Planning Group here at Washington County. I'll be giving a presentation for tonight's hearing. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so I'll try to be as quick as possible, but please ask questions if you have them. Further details on the various findings, of course, can be found in the staff report that was attached to tonight's agenda. Next slide, please. In terms of the order of the presentation, first I'll go over the proposal itself and provide some additional background information on the site, the vicinity, and the land use history of the property. And following the background, I'll provide an overview of the key findings and criteria that were addressed in greater detail in that staff report, followed by the staff recommendation. Next slide, please. Community Planning received a request from Icon Architecture and Planning representing McDaniel Village LLC to change the land use designation of one tax lot of just under 1 acre in size in the Bonnie Slope, the Bluffs sub-area of the Cedar Hills Cedar Mill Community Plan area from neighborhood commercial to residential 9 units per acre, or R9. The purpose of the neighborhood commercial district is to allow for small to medium-sized shopping and service facilities and limited office use in neighborhood commercial centers. The purpose of the R9 district is to provide areas for detached and attached houses on small lots, middle housing, manufactured homes on individual lots, and manufactured dwellings in subdivisions and parks. Next slide, please. Here is a map of the northern section of the Cedar Hills Cedar Mill Community Plan area. I know this is a lot of information on one app, but it's really meant to convey where the subject site is located in the context of other commercial and residential areas. It shows the various land use designations and roadways in the vicinity. At the center of the map is the subject site, marked by a red box, and the site is located approximately 1 mile north of the Northwest Cornell Road commercial area. Immediately north on Northwest 119th Avenue, just after where the road takes a turn east to become Northwest McDaniel Road. The property is located in a primarily residential neighborhood and is surrounded on 3 sides by properties in the R9 land use district, shown in the darker yellow color. The circles are meant to represent tax lots where the existing land use designation is neighborhood commercial. So there's 2 on Northwest Thompson Road and 3 sites along Cornell of the main Cornell commercial district just north of 26. Keep hearing pings and I'm wondering if maybe someone's trying to tell me something really quick here.
Continue on, Brian. Yeah.
Apologize, thanks. Let's see here. Oh, the small oval on the right side is a small commercial area in Multnomah County. So although we don't have land use jurisdiction there, I just wanted to kind of recognize that there's another commercial area in close proximity to this property as well. And all of these commercial areas are generally within a 1 mile radius of the subject property, with the exception of the far western commercial districts. Next slide, please. Here's another map of a slightly closer view of the subject site, shown here again in the lighter red color. This map shows the existing land uses, but also the ISO lines at 10-foot intervals. The darker ISO lines are 10-foot intervals, as well as the potential drainage hazard area shown in the vicinity, highlighted in pink. So in this drainage hazard area, or these drainage hazard areas are really 25-year floodplain areas. So although the property itself has a relatively gentle slope, dropping approximately 15 feet from the north of the property towards the south, the area surrounding it is characterized by more steep slopes and steep terrain, where the ISO lines are grouped more closely together, such as in the pink area, that represents much steeper slopes. So I think given the sub-area is called the bluffs, this gives you some indication as to the terrain in the area. Next slide, please. Quickly, in terms of the land use history, the one detached house that currently exists on the site was built in 1937, prior to any zoning in the county. Zoning was first applied to the property in 1959 as R10, a medium density residential district, and it was replaced by RU3, another low to medium density district, in 1979. The current land use designation of neighborhood commercial was applied to the site in 1983, which has remained the same for 40 years. As the area around it has built out, the property itself has remained relatively unchanged for about 85 years. Next slide, please. Here is a street view of the property as seen along Northwest McDaniel Road, which is a county collector. On the right side of the screen is where Bonnie Slope Elementary School is located. And straight ahead, the road curves south to become Northwest 119th Avenue. And a sidewalk spans most of the street frontage of the property. You can see the R9 residential district to the rear of the house peeking over the fence on the left side. But as you can see, it's a relatively flat site with very little development compared to the properties that surround it. Next slide, please. Here again is an aerial photograph of the property outlined in blue. This is one of the larger lots in the immediate area that has yet to be redeveloped. The townhouses and closely developed detached houses to the south and east are located on properties in the R9 district. Next slide, please. Next, I'll cover the key criteria and findings. I'll discuss staff's findings for the proposal as they relate to state, metro, and county goals and rules, including the statewide planning goals, the transportation planning rule, urban growth management functional plan, as well as the other plans and codes that implement those rules. The findings will focus on citizen involvement, land use, housing, transportation, and facilities and services. Next slide, please. Statewide Planning Goal 1 and Metro Title 8 require us to follow certain procedures to adopt land use changes, such as this plan amendment. As the Planning Commission decides most quasi-judicial plan amendments, these procedures include providing notices of public hearings. The county provided notice to the CPO and all property owners within 500 feet of the property and published notice of tonight's hearing in the Oregonian with information on how to testify. Next slide, please. The applicable land use planning policies relevant to this proposal are provided here, which include 2 statewide planning goals, 6 comprehensive framework policies, the Cedar Hills Cedar Mill Community Plan, and 2 CDC sections. These criteria broadly require the county to adopt a comprehensive plan and permit growth in areas of adequate public facilities, encourage infill development and land conservation, and meet adopted locational criteria, and to strengthen the economy. I'll go into more detail on each of these on the slides that follow. Next slide, please. CFP Policy 1, the planning process allows plan amendments from NC to R9 based on the locational criteria for applying the R9 designation, compliance and conformance with other relevant CFP policies, the community plan overview, sub-area description and design elements in the community plan, policies, strategies, and systems maps of the TSP, the regional functional planning requirements established by Metro, and demonstration of a lack of appropriately designated alternative sites by either size or location. Next slide, please. Staff finds that the request meets the approval criteria based on the following. The proposed amendment to R9 meets statewide planning goal 14 by encouraging efficient use of land and development of livable communities. And while this goal primarily deals with areas newly added to the urban growth boundary, the proposed plan amendment would increase the opportunity for efficient use of land and development of livable communities by facilitating potentially up to 9 units on the site, or potentially more with middle housing. Additionally, staff finds that the proposal meets all of the comprehensive framework plan provisions. The applicant demonstrated compliance with Policy 1 by showing a lack of suitable alternative sites based on the location due to steep slopes and existing development on nearby R9 properties. So as I showed the steep slopes and the drainage hazard areas on a map a couple of slides back, the applicant illustrated that most of the larger sites do include steeper slopes, or the sites that that aren't on steep slopes are relatively developed. Furthermore, adequate services and facilities exist at the site to meet Policy 13, and the applicant demonstrated this through providing service provider letters attached to the application. The proposal also meets CFP Policy 18, the locational criteria for the R9 plan designation. Policy 18 of the CFP states that the R9 district should generally be located close to county collectors or arterial streets, which McDaniel and 119th are both county collectors. Next slide, please. Staff found that the proposal met policies 20 and 39 by putting in underdeveloped property to more productive use and implementing density and location strategies consistent within the CFP for encouraging close relationships between living, working, and shopping. Finally, the Cedar Hills Cedar Mill Community Plan also calls for increased residential density along collectors and land relatively free from steep slopes and drainage hazard areas, and suggests that R9 for this area, for this sub area along Northwest McDaniel, excuse me. Next slide, please. And now I'll move into the housing criteria. Applicable criteria include Goal 10, the Metropolitan Housing Rule, Metro Titles 1 and 12, several comprehensive framework plan policies, the community plan, and certain R9 provisions of the CDC as well. Next slide, please. Staff finds that the request meets the approval criteria in this section based on the following: encourages needed housing in adequate numbers consistent with Goal 10, meets Metropolitan Housing Rule requirement that jurisdictions allow for 50% of new development as attached housing and overall density of 8 or more dwelling units per acre, which R9 allows. This meets Metro Title I housing capacity and minimum density requirements. And it meets the CFP provisions policy 21, 22, and 35, because R9 encourages adequate supply of housing affordable to a range of households. R9 also allows a variety of housing types, including attached and detached housing. R9 allows clustering and common wall dwellings as well, meeting the residential conservation policy. Next slide, please. Next, I'll briefly go over the transportation-related findings. Staff found that the proposed change will have no significant impact on the transportation facilities, as R9 actually reduces trips under significantly worse scenarios if it were to remain neighborhood commercial. The proposal also would not modify the transportation system plan maps, and the relevant TSP findings are discussed on the following slides. Next slide, please. The proposal meets TSP Goal 1 because no significant impact to the roadway safety are anticipated, and future development would likely be conditioned on improving safety for pedestrians and cyclists. Development as a result of the proposed amendment would likely contribute to economic health and improve access to nearby employment, meeting Goal 2. Transportation improvements required as part of development are unlikely to conflict with neighborhood livability, and the proposed amendment would not result in significant degradation of the planned transportation system, meeting the livability and mobility goals of the TSP. Next slide, please. Rounding out the last of the findings are Goal 6 through 10 of the transportation system plan. Staff found that the proposal is likely to meet accessibility and connectivity requirements of Goal 6 and 8, as future development at the site is likely to provide sidewalks and other roadway improvements, helping to fill gaps in the pedestrian system and promoting accessibility and connectivity while promoting active transportation. And finally, future development will be subject to the transportation development tax, so meeting Goal 10 funding requirements will be met. Next slide, please. At this point, I'd just like to note that before I make the staff recommendation, community planning received 2 written comments on this application. One was in support, and one mentioned some transportation concerns in the vicinity. The one in support was a neighboring property owner. Those transportation concerns can be addressed through the subsequent development review process. Staff found that the R9 district is a more appropriate designation for the subject site than NC. And staff recommends that the Planning Commission hold the required public hearing for this request. And at the conclusion of the public hearing, based on the findings and the submitted application and staff report, its attachments, staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve the proposed plan amendment. And next slide, please. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robb. Do commissioners have clarifying questions regarding Mr. Robb's presentation? Right at the moment, I'm not seeing hands up. Yes, Commissioner Milliman.
I'll have one, and I know you told us. Remind me how it got the commercial designation in the first place.
It was applied in 1983, I believe, as the community community planning process, and I believe as part of that community planning work, the idea was to apply the NC designation to properties within, a certain radius of each other to promote walkability and the ability to get many of your daily needs met through shopping and achieve a lot of those goals through your own neighborhood, as opposed to having to leave the neighborhood to to access those services.
Okay, thank you.
Any other commissioners? Well, I have a couple questions. One is that you sent the staff report to various entities like the Board of Commissioners and the Metro and DLCD. I presume that's a matter of notice, but did you get any responses, or simply that they duly noted that they received the report?
We had not received any official response from DLCD or Metro or any of the regional organizations.
I just wondered.
No, that's
Yeah.
okay.
All right. Also, if this zone change happens, what would the approval type be for residential construction on the site? Do you know that at this point? Whether it be a type 3 or not?
I think it depends on whether it would be traditional housing or middle housing, but I do have Ann Kelly, senior planner, on as well, that may be able to better answer that question.
Ms. Kelly? You're muted.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. If it is a standard development of detached housing where a subdivision is proposed, that would be a type 2 land use application. If it's a middle housing land division, it would be just no review type. It would not be considered a land use review, but then the middle housing itself, the development review for that would be a type 1.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And one other question. Right now there exists a road called Leinster Terrace, and it would be vacated if this zone change happens. So what I'm just wondering, vacated means, does that land, what's the fate of that land as far as development? Does that question make sense?
And could you answer that question?
I'm not aware of the potential road vacation. However, if that does happen, generally the land goes back to where it came from originally, whichever lot it was taken from.
Okay.
It may be two, adjoining lots that get some of it back, or it may be just one. I'm not sure.
Okay, so it could be part of new development, or it could be, as you say, go back to another lot that's not being developed. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Havener, yes.
Just a curiosity, I saw that this proposed plan amendment was submitted on behalf of the applicant in August of 22. Is that pretty much a typical timeline?
Yes, we plan amendments typically take a second seat to our other land use work that we do in community planning. That said, we do they are very time consuming, as I'm sure you saw the staff report is very thorough, and we certainly have to make sure that we're covering all of our bases with all of the various policies and criteria. So a lot of research is involved on our end in terms of the compliance side of things. So yeah, 4 to 6 months is fairly typical for these plan amendments.
Okay,
And excuse me, I would also add that that's the submission date. That's not the completeness date. I don't believe that you're mentioning. So there would be a period where staff is communicating with the applicant as to what's needed to make an application complete.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions from commissioners? All right, I'm not seeing any, so that means we can move on. We'll now open the public hearing. And I'd like to ask the applicant if the applicant would like to testify, and if so, they'll be sworn in. As indicated by council, the applicant and their representatives will have up to 10 minutes to testify.
Hey there, this is Tom Nelson, the applicant representing Icon Architecture and Planning.
Great. Thank you, Tom. I know this is virtual and awkward, but just pretend you're in a courtroom, and I'm going to ask you to raise your right hand.
I swear it's raised.
Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. I don't have a whole lot to add to the staff report. I thought that was pretty thorough, but I just wanted to say a few words. Again, I'm Tom Nelson representing Icon Architecture and Planning. The owner of the land is McDaniel Village LLC. They're also on the call, represented by Udi Gordine, Scott Kramer, and Brody Goodell. So we'd like to thank the Planning Commission and Long Range Planning staff for the opportunity to apply for this plan amendment. We appreciate the positive recommendation from planning staff, and we agree with their findings and certainly accept their recommendation. I believe, like I said, the staff report was very thorough and adequately summarizes our reasoning for why we feel that a plan amendment is appropriate for this lot. But I will highlight the key points once again. So number one, the current neighborhood commercial zoning designation was applied to this lot about 40 years ago, as we discussed. And during this time, no development has occurred on that lot. As Brian mentioned, the existing house has been there since 1937. So we feel like that indicates that there's either a lack of demand for commercial construction on this particular lot, or the lot as it's constituted just is not well suited to the things that could be built on it, commercially speaking. Number two, again, as Brian discussed, there are a few, there just aren't that many available lots for residential construction in the surrounding areas. So changing the designation R9 will allow housing to be built in an area where we feel like it integrates well with the surroundings. And then obviously, as I think we all are aware, housing stock is sorely needed throughout the metro and Oregon as a whole. And then the third point we wanted to mention was that, as the transportation report notes, development of the site as housing would most likely result in a reduction in traffic counts compared to a situation where the lot is developed with a commercial use, as would be required with NC. So I just wanted to reiterate those key points. Thank you again for your time and for looking at the issue. And we look forward to the Planning Commission's decision.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you.
I'd now like to ask for testimony from members of the public. Clerk Aguilar, will you please call on people to testify in order indicated by council? We'll start with those in support of the proposal who signed up in advance.
And sorry to interrupt, but just in case no one knows, if you're on the phone and you need to raise your hand, it's *9.
Thank you.
Chair Lockwood, for the record, I just wanted to let you know that after we did roll call, Vice Chair Dye joined us. And so now we have 7 planning commissioners in attendance.
Oh, thank you.
Chair Lockwood, we have 2 people that have signed up. Please state your name and address for the record after I call you. Melissa DeLizer, can you please state your name and address for the record? Then council will begin your oath.
Thank you. My name is Melissa DeLizer. My address is 2511 Northwest Burn Terrace.
Good evening, Melissa. If you'd raise your right hand virtually. Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give in the matter, in this matter, will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Great. If you would proceed to give your testimony, thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Again, my name is Melissa DeLizer. I am an employee of Washington County, but I am here on my own time and am speaking only as a property owner. My husband and I own a home at the corner of Warburg Lane and Burn Terrace, and both my husband and I wholeheartedly support the land use designation change from neighborhood commercial to R9 for this property. The property is surrounded, as was previously mentioned, on 3 sides by properties designated R9. The 4th side across McDaniel Road is designated as institutional and is home to Bonnie Slope Bonnie Slope Elementary School. There is no commercial development in the immediate neighborhood. To be successful, a commercial operation on this site would likely want access onto McDaniel Road. Given the proximity of the 90-degree curve coming off of 119th and the site distance issues created by the landscaping on the adjacent property to the west, this may not be the safest option. In the plan amendment application, the property owner proposes extending 118th Terrace north, ending in a cul-de-sac with no access onto McDaniel. In addition, the plan amendment application calls for the vacation of Leinster east of the site, which will also prevent access onto McDaniel. As neighbors and property owners, we appreciate these traffic safety considerations. Since we purchased our home in 2017, there have been a number of proposed commercial developments for this property. None have panned out. We strongly encourage you to support this plan amendment for residential development as it is best suited for the property, the neighborhood, and potentially the safety of the traveling public. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. DeLizer. And Clerk Aguilar, our next.
Yes, next we have Andrew Downs, who signed up. He did, though, mention that he might not attend tonight, and we didn't see his name in attendance, but he could be one of the callers as well. If Andrew is in the virtual audience, can you state your name and address for the record? Then council will begin your oath.
Actually, if Andrew is in the virtual audience, if he could raise his virtual hand to let us know who he is, that would be great. We'll just take a moment. I don't see any virtual hand raised.
Are there any people in the virtual audience who would like to testify in favor of this proposal? If so, please indicate this by using the raise hand function.
Clerk Aguilar, I see no hands raised.
Okay, we have none.
All right. I think we've concluded the testimony in favor. Testimony in opposition. Will you please call on people to testify in opposition to the proposal who have signed up in advance?
Do we have anybody in the virtual audience who is not in favor of this proposal? Please state your name and address for the record, then council will begin your oath. Looks like we have one in attendance. Her name's Tiffany Hom.
11756 Northwest Warburg Lane, Portland 97229. I live in McDaniel Village.
Great. If Tiffany, if you could raise your right hand, I'll swear you in virtually.
Thank you.
Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Great. Please proceed with your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. I had a concern question. When you are, where would the main entrance be for this new development? Would it be on McDaniel, or will it be coming through the neighborhood off of Warburg and then coming down through Warburg Lane?
Well, we haven't, that's something that would be determined as part of the development application.
Okay.
We're kind of floating a few ideas around at this point, but nothing has been really say.
And, okay, and another concern, if you, next to the development is a Washington County fire lane, I believe.
Right, that's what Leinster.
And that will stay as a fire lane, I'm assuming?
I believe so. Based on my previous research, it sounded like that fire lane was required as part of the original development of
okay.
McDaniel Village. So I think, there'd be some discussions with the fire department, but I imagine they would want that.
Okay, well, my main concern and question, which you can't answer, is if they build this development, will they be coming through the neighborhood and enter on Werber Lane? That's my main concern, because then we're gonna have the traffic and the construction but that cannot be answered at this time. So that was my concern.
Right, yeah, that will obviously, if this is all approved and move forward, that's something that I think will definitely be a topic of conversation.
Is there an entrance that is approved on McDaniel Lane? Because previously there was not an entrance that was going to be approved from what we understood.
I guess I don't know whether anything has or hasn't been approved.
Okay.
So I can't answer that question.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Do we have anyone else, Clerk Aguilar?
It looks like we have Robert Lewis. Please state your name and address for the record, then council will begin with your oath.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Indeed, yes.
Hi, my name is Robert Lewis. I live at 11798 Northwest Werburg Lane. My house is at the corner of 118th Terrace and Werburg, directly across from this potential development. And I just wanted to raise a potential question. So living here now.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I got to swear you in before you provide any.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, go ahead.
But before I do that, I need to actually comment on what occurred during the last witness, which is fine. But normally witnesses are not allowed to examine or cross-examine other witnesses. That actually occurred here. Tom Nelson just voluntarily answered those questions. It's entirely up to the chair's discretion as to whether to allow that. It seemed to be, before I could even interrupt, Mr. Nelson was answering the questions, so it seemed to be just fine. But I'll just let you know that generally witnesses don't have a right to examine or cross-examine other witnesses unless the chair wishes to allow that to occur. But in any event, Robert, if you could raise your right hand and I'll virtually swear you in. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Great. If you could please proceed with your testimony. Thank you.
Yeah, so just a question. Living in the area across from this development, parking is very limited, and we already have kind of an issue in the area where people are kind of fighting for street parking to begin with. And I'm curious with this additional development, what street parking may look like, and if that may exacerbate the issue that we're having currently in that corner.
So I'm going to interrupt here again because I don't want to see this devolve into witnesses asking other witnesses questions. I think the chair needs to control this to some degree. If Mr. Nelson wishes to answer that question and the chair allows it, that's absolutely fine. But generally witnesses don't ask questions, they provide testimony.
Sure, and it doesn't have to be a question anyone answers. I just kind of want to put that on the record and just make that a comment at least.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate to put it in the record. And then if a development is proposed later, I think you'd have the opportunity then to address that.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone else who wants to testify in opposition?
Chair Lockwood, that is all the people we have in opposition to the proposal.
All right.
And if I hate to interrupt again, Madam Chair, just to clarify, if the applicants choose to respond to any of the questions posed, they always have the opportunity during rebuttal to do so. So if there's any lingering questions the applicants wish to address, that would be kind of normally the time you would do that in these types of proceedings.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder. The applicant will have an opportunity later if they wish. to save more. I think we are now ready to take testimony from anyone who is neutral on the question but wants to testify. Do we have anyone?
We don't have anyone signed up. Are there any people in the virtual audience who would like to testify who are neutral to this proposal? If so, please indicate this by using the raise hand function.
Clerk Aguilar, Virginia Bruce has her hand up. And she's been unmuted.
Hello.
Hello.
And Ms. Bruce, are you wanting to testify as a neutral in this matter?
I'm testifying as our CPO chair, and based on the comments at our CPO meeting last night, I have comments that are basically neutral.
Great. If you would raise your right hand, I'll virtually swear you in and you can provide that testimony. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Great. Thank you very much, and please proceed with your testimony. Since you're representing a CPO, by the way, I think that means you have 10 minutes.
I can't possibly fill 10 minutes with my comments. I've been watching this property for years and years and years and years. It's been a sort of a hippie commune at one point, with a central house and a whole bunch of temporary trailers, basically, and tents all around it. The neighbors, you know, had to put up with that. And then the owner put it up for sale. There was a huge billboard there and all sorts of blue sky ideas about neighborhood commercial and mixed use and so forth. And that was, it sold to somebody, but they couldn't figure out how to make it work. And then I heard rumors that it would be a daycare or a preschool, and that didn't work. And just as Melissa said, it doesn't seem that there is a good viable commercial use for this property. The transportation issues are significant. That 90-degree curve and a school right across the street doesn't seem like it would be a good place to have another entry on McDaniel. On the other hand, and this is why my testimony is neutral, there are a lot of people who think that being able to walk to some form of little neighborhood grocery or something is a way to encourage walkability, use of pedestrian facilities and bicycle facilities and so forth. We have an example of a really good use of a neighborhood commercial property down in the neighborhood to the southeast, which is called the Little Store. And after a whole lot of back and forth and hoo-ha, they managed to open a really valuable neighborhood asset. But we've never seen anybody come forward with an idea to do that in this location. And so there you go. You know, you got both sides. It would be, in light of all the parking discussion and the sustainability discussion, one would think that walking to the little store to get your bottle of milk or your cup of coffee would be lovely. But this doesn't seem like a terrifically good property for that. So I brought the facts forward last night at our CPO meeting. CPO 1 encompasses this area, and nobody jumped up in opposition or in support. So I am bringing the opinion of my CPO along with my observations of the site for your consideration.
Thank you. Thank you for testifying. Clerk Aguilar, do we have anyone else who's neutral?
Chair Lockwood, that is all the people we have who are neutral to the proposal. Public testimony is complete.
Thank you. I think at this point we have time for the applicant rebuttal. The applicant or their representatives have up to 5 minutes to offer further information if they wish.
Yeah, this is Tom Nelson again. Yeah, I apologize for kind of getting to a discussion there. I saw that I was unmuted, so I figured I should just talk. But now I understand the process a little more. Yeah, I don't have too much else to add. I would just say, as far as the parking goes, you know, we're going to work with the county on that and follow all of the regulations and guidelines in place to ensure that this works for the community. So that's kind of our response to that. I don't have too much else to say.
Thank you. Clerk Aguilar, has any additional written testimony been received while we've been in session?
No, we have not received any additional written testimony.
Okay, thank you. I think we are now ready to close this hearing, close the public hearing. And the public hearing is closed and we're ready for deliberation among the planning commissioners. Does anyone have comments about what we've heard, or questions, further questions for staff? Well, I can comment that from what I've read and heard tonight, from all the material we received, which I read, it seems that commercial uses are adequately served in the area without this property being developed commercial. Also, as we all know so well, housing is needed. And this gives us an opportunity for further housing. And the process seems to have been very diligently followed. So those would be my comments. Anyone want to add something? I would welcome a motion then, if anyone is ready to make a motion.
The application.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Commissioner Kaiser.
I move approval of the application.
We have a motion to approve the application. Is there a second?
I'd like to second that, Commissioner Dye.
Oh, thank you, Vice Chair Dye. So we have a motion and a second to approve this plan amendment. Is anyone opposed? I believe all are in favor of approving this change from commercial to residential. The motion passes. Mr. Bovet, is there anything else we need to do?
Not on that matter. I think that matter is now concluded.
Thank you. All right, thank you, everyone. I think all we have left on our agenda is proceeding to the election of chair and vice chair for the coming year, starting at our next meeting. The newly elected will start serving then. Are there, we'll start with chair. Are there any nominations for chair for this coming year? Mr. Bovet, are you going to notify me of some?
No, if it's all right, Madam Chair, I'd like to just put a disclosure on the record to make sure that we comply with public meetings law, if that's all right.
Sure.
Before we get started, earlier this afternoon, planning commissioners and staff received an email from Commissioner Podar, who graciously let us know she was going to be missing this meeting and was looking forward to seeing us in the next meeting. But in the bottom of her email, she mentioned essentially what could be taken as her preferences for a chair and vice chair. All of the commissioners have seen that, but I did want to place that on the record because even though that is a public record, it's not part of this public meeting record. And since she is absent today, she cannot participate in these deliberations or vote. And Oregon law does not allow any proxy voting, but she did send an email that basically stated her preferences for Commissioner Bidu for chair and Commissioner Dye for chair and Commissioner Bidu for vice chair. And then on the alternative, the current lineup with Chair Lockwood and Vice Chair Dye. I just wanted to put that on the record because that's not disclosed in this public meeting. And I wanted to essentially make sure we complied with the public meetings law. Hated to interrupt you for that, but now you can open it up to nominations, discussions, deliberations, and action on chair and vice chair. Thank you.
Right, and I do have a question. Is a nomination received in that manner? Since she's not present, I mean, what do we do with that nomination?
It does not effective. So someone else could make a nomination that mirrored that, but in order to participate in a public meeting as a member of a public body, all deliberations, decisions, and discussion and actions have to be done in an open public meeting, not in some separate email or public record that lies elsewhere. So any nominations, motions, discussions, deliberations, or decisions about chair and vice chair have to be made here in this open public meeting.
Thank you. All right, nominations for chair.
Sorry about that. I am in a hotel room trying to make this work. I'd like to nominate Chair Lockwood to remain in that position.
And I think at this point I have to indicate whether or not I'm ready or willing to serve. Yes, I'm willing to serve. Any other nominations? I guess I should have first asked, is there a second to the nomination?
Second the motion, the nomination.
And who, I didn't see who that was.
Commissioner Kaiser.
Thank you.
Second the motion. And
So-
and I know you already asked if there's other nominations, but if you could ask now outside of that motion again, that would be helpful.
Thank you. Right, yes. So we have one nomination that's been moved and seconded. Are there any other nominations for chair? I am not seeing any. So yes, I said I was willing to serve. Is anyone opposed to that nomination? Chair Lockwood continuing. I'm not seeing anyone, so I think we've chosen our chair for the coming year. Thank you. Nominations for vice chair. Commissioner Bidu.
I would like to nominate Vice Chair Dye.
I'd like to second that nomination. Vice Chair Dye, are you willing to serve for the coming year?
I would be honored to continue to serve in that capacity.
Are there
And
further
again, yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Are there further nominations for vice chair? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Is anyone opposed to Vice Chair Dye serving in the coming year as vice chair? I'm not seeing any hands up. I think we've elected our vice chair. So thank you. That was pretty quick operation. And thank you for the faith in me to continue for another year. We'll move on to our next item, which is Planning Commission announcements. Does anyone have anything they want to share with their fellow commissioners at this point? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. I wanted to just briefly reiterate what Ms. Wardell was talking about, that we've been meeting virtually due to the pandemic, and now that that's waning and we have the opportunity to meet in person if we so choose, I'd like to have a discussion about that. So if you could all be thinking about what works best for you, how you'd like to organize our meetings. Maybe we could talk about that next time in this slot or elsewhere. Maybe we'll put it on the agenda elsewhere, but please be thinking about that for next time, and we can get an idea of what works and what you prefer as far as virtual or in-person meetings, or actually I should say hybrid, because I think that's the option, virtual or hybrid. Any other announcements or comments? Next item is adjournment. Is there any objection to adjourning at this point? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.